come in and you've got the kitchen here and then it's
Okay.
like dining, living in one room and then bedroom.
That-
Yeah.
Out of,
There's just no creativity in floor plan.
That's what I'm
The
saying.
living room literally
But
has
do-
doors to the balcony, and then in
boards.
blanket wall
Exactly.
Studies.
couches. There could be
Feed-
windows along the wall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing.
I had to
It's all just
make
blank
pipeline
pipe.
kind of keep.
So much time to
So
open.
That's what
And
I.
it-
They're probably like, that window's gonna.
That's why I've asked
Another $2,000.
So
Not gonna-
those orders, most of those get
What
it
is the rent at, what is it?
if a locality or some
It's two
size.
apartment complex,
These weren't necessarily
Okay.
silver company.
like in staff. They,
Oh, okay.
It's, I mean,
they
deep
had
in
five
that.
gaps.
Uh-huh.
The fifth one was
Yeah, see, and that's where I say,
Stafford.
Okay.
Hills.
if you're working in
Right.
DC and it
And
doesn't,
that's
it's not,
the-
people,
I got you.
There was injury.
or once a
Okay.
week, has one BRE,
That
then it's not worth it.
Right,
I-
So you had
which
that
was
kind
a
of.
dilemma that I was working towards last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and, as much as it pains me,
Oh, bye
They
bye.
couldn't know everything.
I try to do
Did
it
he-
out, like, into DC, like if I.
Yeah.
They did. Okay.
Like, I'm not,
The other-
I can't justify it.
Yeah.
Especially because like we
But
live
next time.
Yeah. I
environment.
am
to-
getting his name.
Mixed bag.
for the
It's a
city.
mixed bag. So like I
He
said,
lives down.
they
south
Yeah,
of it.
yeah,
And I think he.
still remain on the shelf. Can apply.
Well, he, so, cause he was.
It's apply with
I'm trying-
successful
Yeah.
time. You
So he would,
apply for that.
catch me there. Or he'd actually,
And-
he'd drive and get on 86,
Okay.
174.
I guess you had.
And,
Yeah.
Out three.
but we had
Some
people that did that,
Exactly.
lived in this area and
So-
one spouse went this way.
Yeah.
How you doing?
I just.
So that's the reason I was asking that question.
Yes.
Because
Well, sometimes
I felt just some of my
a great
hurt.
deal of
Man, it,
reliability and
And
travel time saving
that's what-
out,
Exactly.
increasing the track speed,
Get
you
more
just don't
effective.
stop as much.
Yeah.
the
That's, we
medic
keep
that-
that,
No.
yeah.
See where I'm going with it?
As as
That's where I'm going.
infrastructure,
Like-
yes,
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay.
be strategic about the stopping patterns of each of
Yeah,
them.
and I would love to see an express train, like high speed,
It's my
150
day.
miles an hour
Okay.
from Richmond,
They'll be taking
There's-
Fredericksburg,
Yeah.
Springfield.
Yeah, that didn't get, so.
I would
Okay.
direct you to the DC to Army
Gotcha.
high-speed rail.
You'll be chairing the TAC in May?
That-
That would be
Provide
fun.
in-depth,
Never going
Run, Forrest, run.
without
So
billions,
Need to do
Yeah.
billions.
those-
of
We
dollars.
even to the side, I remember the
May
side,
the 4th, like Star Wars.
Yeah, we.
consultants
Oh, wow.
to, or no,
May the 4th be with you and baby.
look at, because people, we kept on getting requests, well, why don't you just use medians, 95 medians,
He had,
and
So before we start our meeting, folks,
undulate,
I remember we talked about.
yeah.
before we start our meeting, folks, I think we should offer congratulations to our FEMPO chair, TAC chair,
Yeah.
on prospective new
Yeah.
Jackson.
If you didn't know already, so you could tell, I'm pregnant, Ian just told everybody.
My bad.
So I'm due May 4th, so you won't see me.
If you wait till 2 days,
Be in line with you.
me and David can celebrate.
If she takes any longer than May 4th, I might be like, you know
We can
what?
wait one more day, but still.
Because
Gonna, it's,
Every
no, no, no.
every year.
May the 4th, it's the Star Wars station.
twins, Luke and Leah.
What?
Luke and Leah, it's twins.
Already at home. Her place she could have like.
Get her with that.
So,
It's either Luke or Leah, right?
the name, right. My husband is talking about something that starts with an A, and I'm like, I can't think of anybody I know that like has a really like A name that I want to start with. So if you have an A name, I love you all, but that's too much.
Anakin.
Anakin.
Hey, the 4th.
This,
How you get your child
comes,
school?
Adam? Oh, man.
She already gonna have to fight because her mom's crazy. Good morning. Heading it started with the TAC meeting. Now we are officially in our meeting. So I'm calling the meeting to order. I will turn it over to Coley as to do the roll call and determination of quorum.
Charlie, are we recording?
Yes,
Right. I believe there's some people online.
yes, there are multiple people online. Jamie Jackson,
Here.
Hassan Amin.
Here.
Mike Craig.
Here.
Brian Council,
Here.
Lahane,
here,
Paul Agnello,
Here.
Rodney White,
Here.
Jacob Pastwick, and Mohammed bin Omar are online.
Here.
Thank you. Nick Miner, Kimberly Wilson, Mike Fincham.
Nick is here. I think he's just gone to the restroom.
Oh, okay. Craig Pennington, Melody Fowler, Craig Reed, Amy Garbarini is online, Michelle Shropshire, here. Stephen Hayes,
Here.
Susan Gardner, here. Christine Hoffner, Nick Ruiz,
Here.
Stephen Miner, Bob Schneider, Joe Stainsby, I believe, is online. Yes.
Right.
Kate Gibson. And is there anyone whose name I did not call?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Anybody else online that you don't know?
Chris Daly, Drew Morrison, Fran Larkins, Jim Ponticello,
Great.
Harry, and everybody else. Great. Roll has been conducted. Quorum is present. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the next item is item number 3, approval of the February 6th TAC agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Okay, Paul in a second.
Second.
Matt. Any discussion? Anything missed? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
You are opposed. You will offer the same. All right. Thank you much. All right, review of the January 23rd policy committee meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Coley, if you could just pull up the agenda of the policy committee meeting, please. We had a large number of folks from Celebrate Virginia come to the policy committee meeting for the public hearing on the East-West Mobility Study Roadway Report. A lot of folks talking about one particular project, which is the possible river crossing. And a lot of folks again speaking out against it being connected to Celebrate Virginia Parkway. And a couple of folks speaking very strongly about the need for a crossing and all the traffic they get stuck in and alternative routes and all that kind of thing. So we heard from all of those. I don't think we had any in-person public comment on other issues for the regular public comment period. The resolution for the debt funding for the river crossing bridge was approved, sent that off to VDOT, my administrator's report. And then we had a presentation by DJ Statler from the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. It's the first time the VPRA has ever come to FAMPO, and we don't have any representatives from the VPRA on any of the FAMPO committees. So we invited DJ to just introduce the VPRA to us, and he gave us a presentation, which is online if you want to see it. It's just looking at what the role of VPRA is and the long-term and short-term future plans for purchasing rail right-of-way, for the upgrades, for the train station upgrades, the new third track sections to be built through our region, and then the very long-term view, which he spoke about, would involve building a new bridge over the Rappahannock for the rail, and then building a new train station to accommodate a third track and eventually a fourth track. And the very long-term view, I think, is to have 4 tracks all the way to Richmond. But to get there, you've got to build all of these pieces over a long period of time. So he just spoke about all of that and how it's going and that kind of thing. Interesting comment from one of the policy, from a supervisor who attended but is not actually a member of the policy committee, who said, us federal workers have been told we have to go back to in-person working in DC. So maybe some future uptick in ridership for the VRE if that's true. The CMAC STBG update, you know most of that anyway, and we're talking about it today. The roadway report, again, we have it on the agenda for today. You know much about that. We had some debate about the survey and whether the survey has any duplicates and whether it represents the whole region, etc. The new river crossing research. I presented just the streetlight data maps showing where the traffic is moving from and where it's going to across the river. Smart Scale Carrie did a great presentation to the policy committee, just showing what projects scored well, what funding we've got recommended for our region, which of our projects are recommended for funding, and also the jurisdictions. She did a very brief verbal presentation because the meeting was really long and people had been already to the GWRC board meeting. The TIP resolution was approved. However, it did not include the transit project list and the what's the word, John?
It's the transit project obligation.
The obligations. Amy, if you're online, I don't know whether you've got any information for us on the DRPT obligated projects that need to be in our TIP and STIP, but we are still waiting on DRPT for the transit project list. Do you know when we'd be able to get that?
Well, we responded to one of the emails and asked if you guys had the last year's email that you sent of the transit project list, because as far as we know, you guys would be the ones providing the transit projects that you want us to include. So we're not, me and Todd and I were not familiar with the transit project list you were talking about. So if you could forward me the one from last year that Ciara maybe sent you, we can work on that.
Okay, John will resend that to you, but we do need to know in terms of what funds are obligated on your side, because we have obviously the list of projects that we know about, but there may be a project you know about that we don't know about. So if you could tell us what your final list would be, we will then make sure that we haven't missed out a project.
Okay. I'll get back to you tomorrow.
Thank you. The previous I-95 corridor study overview, that was just a request by Supervisor Ross that I make a presentation on that. Mr. Ross is no longer a full policy committee member. He's become an alternate, and he wasn't in the meeting, but I did present the overview, and that's all I think I have to say on that.
Great. Anybody have any questions about the meeting for FAMPO? Yes, it was a very lively public outreach or public comment discussion period. So thank you, Ian, for handling that with tons of grace. So kudos to you on that. We're going to go over to the public comment period. If there are any members of the public that are wishing to speak at this time, we will ask you to do so. If you are on the line, just please start off with stating your name. And I will ask FAMPO staff in the interim, do you have any written comments that you would like to share from the public?
Coley?
None that are not related to the East-West study report.
Okay.
Sounds like we have no comment.
So we're good?
Yep.
All right.
Nobody online is speaking up.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. All right. So I'll close the public comment period. We'll turn it over to the next item, which is the consent agenda. Our consent item today is just the approval of the January 9th TAC meeting minutes. Hopefully you had a chance to review those. But if anybody has any questions or changes, unless they're administrative, I will ask for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
All right, Paul, and can I get a second, please?
Second.
All right, any discussion from the group? All righty. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, we offer you the same. Great. The meeting minutes from January 9th are approved. All right, we are going into the excitement period, which is the action and discussion items. I will turn it over to, are you excited? I think you are. To FAMPO staff, so this is FAMPO Resolution 23-09. That information was put in your agenda packet, and this is regarding the adoption of the FAMPO Interregional Multimodal East-West Mobility Study Phase 2 Road and Bicycle Pedestrian Report. And just in case y'all wonder why I read this stuff out loud, it's technically really supposed to, just in case somebody see what you're putting on the screen. So,
Thank you, Madam Chair. The resolution from our side it's just whether or not we wish to endorse the resolution. It's a resolution of the policy committee. The report is in your pack. Adjustments were made that were requested, except there is 2 points that Matthew made from Stafford, which are not in the copy of the report that's in your pack. We have responded to Matthew, I've sent it to VHB. They acknowledged that yes, they can make those amendments. It's a map that is not quite accurate, and one other item. They will do that before the report goes to the policy committee, so we will make those amendments. We do have VHB online listening in, so if there's any additional items, we can they'll be there to hear. So if anybody notices any errors in the report or anything that that VHB has missed, let us know. You can tell us now if you know an obvious one. If not, please email me like by the end of the week, because we need to make any last minute edits and changes to the report so that we can then take it through to the policy committee.
I had a question on table 4, number 11. I don't know if we just want to bring that up.
you have a page number for a really quick?
It's
Can
near
you
the beginning.
pull up the report, Curly?
It's page
Table 4, right, Paul?
yeah, table 4, yeah.
Page 15.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Page what?
15, that's where it starts.
Page 15, but it's actual or PDF page 17 in your, or 16 in your thing, if you're searching by the. There. Yep. Back up.
That's 15. Is that the one, Paul?
Yep,
Yeah, so
page 15.
yeah, so my question is, with regards to number 11, shouldn't that be 2 projects and not 1? You know, so higher up on the table basically lists kind of 2 different projects. And one would be the new river crossing. Basically, the other project is the new interchange. And just given that they're both pretty expensive projects, it would seem good just to list them separately.
Yep, that's how we did it in other places, so we can make that change for number 11. Thanks for flagging that.
Okay, thanks, Drew.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments from anybody? So we've got 2 amendments from Matthew, which we, I believe, Drew and Chris were saying is fine. They can make those comments. It's not a problem. Make those changes, not a problem. And Paul's comment you've heard, they'll quite happily make that change as well.
Sure. Any comments you want to make, Matt, on those 2 items?
Do you want me to mention them or?
Yeah, I would go
Okay.
ahead just so everybody knows.
Gosh, I do not know what page number. But the first comment was regards to the map showing the Western network, and it was just showing the connection between Centerville Parkway and Courthouse Road as connecting at Austin Run Drive, where it should connect at Mine Road. So that'll be updated. And then the other comment was near the end of the document, when it was describing the Western network and the proposal for that plan, and just added a few notes to better discuss what improvements could happen in regards to that project. It didn't mention anything along Centerville Parkway, and it didn't mention anything along Plantation Drive, whereas we'd be adding a road next to Centerville Parkway on both sides. We should see if we need to upgrade Centerville Parkway. We'd be adding a road next to Plantation Drive. We should see if we need to upgrade that as well.
The report also indicates projects that are definitely being taken forward to the engineering phase. So that is a change in the report. So it includes the Western Network. It includes in Spotsy the widening of Harrison Road, etc. So that is specifically mentioned in the roadway portion of the report as well, so that you know what's going to be done in the final phase of the study, which is preparing towards funding applications, right? So bike paths, transit projects, and then these roadway projects.
All right, any other questions or VHB? If you have any page numbers referencing Matt's items, feel free to shout those out, but if you do not, I think his description was clear enough.
He did email it, and they've got the email, and they've acknowledged it, so we do know where they are.
Okay, any other comments or questions regarding this study or this report? So we will add this to 3 changes.
This is not the end of the study, but this is the completion
Okay.
of this report.
All right. So if we have no other discussion items, I am going to look for a motion that endorses resolution 23-09, obviously with the 3 changes that were mentioned between Spotsylvania and Stafford counties. So can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a first and second. Do we have any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, no need for a roll call. That motion passes for the resolution. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
All right, I'm going to turn item B over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Senate Bill 1137. The reason we put this on the agenda is because it made it out of the committee and to the floor of the Senate in Virginia, and it looked like it might pass the Senate. In the end, it did not. It failed by 1 vote. It was largely along party lines, but one Democratic senator in Richmond voted no. So they had 20 votes and they needed 21 for it to pass. So it failed by 1 vote. Local senators from our specific region were not in favor, and I think that all the Republicans voted against it. So it did not pass through to the House, and effectively it dies. It may be resurrected in the next sitting, which is only next year. So at the moment, there's nothing we can do about it. It's just an interesting bill, and also this is the 3rd time since I've been at FAMPO that a bill has been tabled. Sorry, not tabled. I forget my South African terminology from time to time. A bill that has been submitted in the Virginia House or Senate to create a transportation authority. So it looks like the idea and the issue is not going to go away. People will keep bringing it back, and FAMPO should, I believe, discuss how to deal with this in future. I would rather that we, as a group of committees, and particularly the policy committee, think through how to respond in future rather than just let it go into abeyance, and then the next one comes along and then there's mad panic at the last minute. Oh, do we have to go stop this bill or not, right? I would rather we had a more thoughtful, measured response to whether or not a transportation authority is something that we need in the region and something that we want in the region. And if we do or want one, then what should be in it and what should definitely not be in it. I'd rather have a measured response than this kind of panic every time somebody tables a bill without telling us, which is what they frequently do, right? The biggest problem with these bills is that the previous 2 and this one, there was no consultation with FAMPO or GWRC or even the Chamber of Commerce. And those 3 bodies, FAMPO, GWRC, and the Chamber of Commerce, I don't believe have the same opinion on this issue. But the point is, every time that this happens, they don't talk to us. They present a bill, submit a bill, and then everybody runs around with their chickens with their head, try and deal with this matter. So my proposal is that we get FAMPO to start thinking slowly about this and come up with an opinion that guides our future. Sorry.
So I just had a general question, like, do we know, like, was there any conversation with any of the localities? I know, like, there was no conversation with Spotsylvania.
There were no conversations, and Ian can back me up on this. I think all of your elected officials and non-elected officials, your leadership literally called in and
They
said,
called me and they're like, hey, do you know anything about this? I'm like, I only know about it, honestly, because Bob Schneider emailed me and Chip Boyle the first note when it was submitted to the legislature. And he said, hey, have you all seen this? Actually, I think he said, I assume you've seen this. And I was like, no, I haven't seen this. I don't know what the hell it is. And excuse my language. And we then became aware of the bill. So we are not aware. The Chamber of Commerce called me to ask if FAMPO had anything to do with it.
One note, that Jeremy McPike is not in FAMPA region. He represents a district
Yes,
up between Prince William and Fairfax.
Manassas
Yeah.
kind of region. We are aware.
Tom?
I just wanted to ask again, what's the difference would be between FAMBO and this authority?
Well, FAMPO,
Their duty is what?
so FAMPO covers 3 jurisdictions, and this bill creates an authority over 5 jurisdictions. Also, it has nothing to do with FAMPO. There's no connection, and I think that's one of the weaknesses of this version. There is no connection between FAMPO or GWRC. So let's say a bunch of people get nominated to sit on this board, and they decide, oh, we want to build a highway through Stephen's house. If they want to fund it, they don't have to ask our permission. They don't have to discuss it with us. They can just, now presumably it will be supervisors and city councilmen from the jurisdictions involved. However, might not be the same ones that sit on FAMPA and GWRC, and if they vote differently, they can do whatever they want. So I think that's a weakness, is that there's no connection between the people working really hard like yourselves on planning projects. There's no connection between them and this body.
Would they be working with the policy? No.
The bill does not mention FAMPA or GWRC. It talks about Planning District 16. And in fact, this version of the bill has numerous kind of language problems. It talks about the long-range transportation plan of Planning District 16, which, as you know, there's no such document. So I said, Chip and I drove to Richmond and met with Senator Pike and said to him, you know, I could suggest a couple of just textual, whether or not I like the idea, you need to change that, because there is no such document. We have 2 long-range transportation plans, because in terms of the federal highways determination, we had to split the urban LRTP from the rural one, and we created a new rural one just as I was arriving at FAMPO, actually. And then we created the new 2050 LRTP for FAMPO. So there are 2 LRTPs in Planning District 16. And so that document, I mean, financially, it has some things going for it, because the $15 million that comes from the recordation fees, taxes, that is money that is already being taxed, right? Or a fee that's been levied. It's not a new tax, it's one that already exists. And the money mostly goes to Hampton Roads, I believe. Money raised in this region. So that's what this has going for it, is that it's, I would say, our money that's being spent in Hampton Roads, which I think is kind of wrong. But that's what this bill tried to fix, to bring that money back here.
I was just going to ask, I mean, has the policy committee in the past seriously considered drafting, you know, model language that they could then find one of the local legislators here to bring before the, you know, next year's session or something? I mean,
The policy committee was not in favor of a transportation authority generally.
okay.
And that
What,
narrowly, a resolution was narrowly defeated at FAMPO to actually say formally that FAMPO is totally against a transportation authority. About, was it 2 years ago? I don't know. I was here,
okay.
and I argued quite strongly in the policy committee. As you know, I don't have a vote, but I argued quite strongly that we should not take such a step and have a resolution which says we'll never have a transportation authority, because what if things change in the future? And thankfully, I would say, from my perspective, that's the decision was taken by vote, but it was like a 1 vote difference to not say that. There was a move to formally take a decision. So there's some strong feeling against these sorts of bills and this particular transportation authority conceptually. However, in this particular case, this version, the financial part of it is actually I would say a positive, because it's not a whole bunch of new taxes.
Repatriating.
It's just bringing back money that's already being taken.
Anybody has any more comments? You wanna, oh, go.
I'll go.
Okay, well,
So I want to make the comment that, like, from Spotsylvania perspective, we're interested in getting the recordation tax back. On the other taxes, I think there need to be a regional discussion on that, and I'm not saying that these are bad taxes, but there have to be a lot of vetting of that. The other point that I want to make about the recordation tax is when kind of the region got that, I think it just went all like to the localities. If Stafford got theirs, Spotsylvania got theirs, city got theirs. I'm not sure like if King George and Caroline were part of that or not. Maybe they were. I'm not sure. But I mean, the 50-50 kind of split from a Spotsylvania perspective isn't really that attractive. We would want more of it back at the local level.
But I apologize, you probably can't recall this conversation, but why was the vote against it for that reason?
You mean at the policy committee? Well, there was some strong feeling that the previous two previous two draft bills came from Josh Cole, and there was a strong feeling that Josh Cole had not consulted anybody in the region, had made it a personal campaign promise in his election campaign and re-election campaign, and he was about to be re-elected, and he'd said publicly, "I will make this happen," or some words to that effect. And a number of our politicians were very upset by the way that was handled. I mean, and this is even worse. This is a guy from outside the region trying to do it. So process-wise, it was very badly handled all three times, in my view. As a former politician, I can say if you're going to do something in somebody else's neighborhood and you don't even tell anyone, that's just looking for trouble. No one's going to support you. So I mean, I think that's process-wise problematic. There were one or two who also don't want their money to be put into a central pot. They want to keep it in their jurisdiction. So there are some of those sentiments also.
Does it have anything to do with like just adding another tax to the region? Anybody have that discussion?
Well, people are raising bonds, which have to be repaid out of taxes money. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to pay for transportation projects.
Right.
So if you need more projects, you need more money. If you need more money, you have to find it, and it's usually some form of taxation somewhere along the line. The question is how the cookie crumbles, which is why I think that kind of a broad discussion of future FAMPO regional funding should be had in order to try to get a more principled and more long-term view, so that we don't have this, oh my God, this person's trying to do this, we better stop it. Because then you don't make good long-term decisions. You're stopping a particular problem. And all of these bills are problematic from that one perspective, is that they don't talk to anybody, they table this bill, and then, you know, why not have some local conversations? Right? At least then you can say I consulted.
I just want to make one last comment. Basically, if there was an authority for the GWC or the FAMPO region, it would have to have a different board than FAMPO and GWC, but it doesn't mean that the staffing to it would have to be different. And if you look at like Richmond and Hampton Roads, Northern Virginia, a lot of times they have some state legislators are on the board, so that would probably be a difference that would happen in this region.
This one was, according to Senator Pike, based on the Hampton Roads model.
HR TAC.
Yeah.
Whatever.
There'd be like a separate executive director and board members.
The bill says that it would have staff of its own.
Okay.
But as Paul says, there are ways to cut that. I'm just concerned that it makes no reference to FAMPO or GWRC at all, which I think is a flaw. There should be a way for us as a body to be able to suggest projects to the people that are going to make the decisions.
Yep, so,
Can they interfere with you, FAMBO work maybe, or VDOT recommendations or last recommendation projects?
So a transportation authority is just a fundraising
like a bank.
organization. It raises money for transportation projects, and it then decides which projects to spend the money on. That's all it does. It doesn't have any jurisdiction over FAMPO or GWRC. So we carry on doing what we do. There's just an extra now, and it's an extra way of getting funding, particularly because regions are finding that they're just not able to raise enough funding for the projects that they think are needed. And so the big jurisdictions in the state of Virginia have got these transportation authorities, which raise hundreds of millions of dollars extra. And the one vote which I'd like to know more about is why the Richmond senator voted against this thing, the Democratic senator in Richmond. And it sounds to me a little bit like competition, right? We're going to now suddenly climb up out of the swamp, and maybe we compete with them for something.
So next steps for FAMPO though, in obviously this committee as well, did staff have any thoughts about how to approach this with FAMPO moving forward? Whether it's explanation of the impacts of the recordation tax, or basically making them understand kind of what this looks like. And just so y'all, from my perspective, when I look at this, because I do remember when this all happened in Hampton Roads, and just so you know, that big beautiful tunnel that they have is built through HR TAC. So how you come up with $2 billion or whatever, something crazy, that project was not in anybody's pipeline. So I do want to put that in context where you say you've got this funding resource that makes things happen, and they have a staff of one that works maybe with some of the other FAMPO and GWRC like staff, but they have a lot of money to play with that I'm sure VDOT would.
Richmond last year wrote a check for the transit operator of $100 million.
And I think
One check.
HRT gets quite a chunk of change.
It's just unbelievable.
I was just going to make,
But I could be wrong, correct me, anybody.
comment. I think that's where one of the big benefits of something like this would lie, is a dedicated source of funding for transit operations, and what the breakdown would be. Obviously, gets into the weeds of whatever bill, but
I mean, it's all negotiable, right? Put the things on the table and discuss them, and maybe we can come up with a formula that people like.
it's just more cost effective because, when it's not feast or famine, you can plan for things. You can develop a pipeline of transit projects. Those get out of the way, and then you can focus on the bigger regional priorities. And so, I mean, VRE would be in favor of something like this. It would provide an additional stream of potential revenue for our projects down here.
So I would just say, as part of the FAMPO agenda, unless anybody has any objections, is that we do at least evaluate what this actually could potentially look like based on what other jurisdictions have seen. Not saying y'all need to do a heavy lift for work on there, because it's all on HR TAC website. I know for in the Hampton Roads area. So
you
I don't know what the next step is.
Do you want me to make a slide presentation for the TAC? I don't have a particular detailed agenda worked out. I was coming here just to tell you, hey, this thing hasn't died yet, and then it died on Friday afternoon. So we'd already sent you all of this stuff. In terms of the policy committee, we have scheduled a workshop of the policy committee to talk about congestion. So I would suggest that from the policy committee side, after that congestion workshop would be a good time to talk about, okay, now we've got an idea of what we want to do in the future about congestion. How do we fund that future? So that would be like the next logical step to say, well, can we afford what we think should be done in the future? And then where do we find the money? And this is one option. There may be other ways of getting additional funding.
One suggestion, just to Jimmy's comment, you might just want to kind of couch it that basically just to look at additional ways to get additional funding. I know with our board member that it's just focused on like RTA only. there might just be more pushback. I think if we were to look a little broadly,
I know, that's my intention,
it
yeah.
would probably be better received.
Yeah, I think that's the point. I think once they've had the congestion workshop, a month later, we can then start talking about future funding for FAMPO and GWRC, or maybe just FAMPO, whatever. What does that look like, and what should we be doing about that? And this concept could be one of, options that could be talked about.
Yep.
And I'll say if we're going to have a serious discussion on this and do some work, probably that should go into the UPWP for this coming fiscal year.
Yep. Very good point. All right. Any last comments?
What's the EPWP? I'm sorry.
UP.
UPWP. People in this region say the letter U in a strange way that when they say UPWP really quickly, I first thought they were saying EPWP. And I was like, what? Uniform Planning Work Program, I believe is the thing. It's basically the FAMPO business plan. And I'm not allowed to,
By the feds.
I'm not allowed to spend any money that's not
Gotcha.
in that plan.
All right. Any other items on this? I think that was good discussion, and I think it's something that, as far as examples, based on what other regions are doing and getting money for, whether we pursue it or not, I think the funding concept that you mentioned outline, I think everything you said was correct, and then also other localities understanding what other jurisdictions do with that money, because it is a good chunk of change, and we are missing out on that as a region, in my opinion. But again, like I said, just go to Hampton Roads and just go from Hampton to Norfolk and look at that bridge. Whew, it's a beauty, and it costs a whole lot of money. So, next item up on the agenda, I'll turn it back over to you, Ian, for the census 2020.
So this is just two short slides. There's very little in here, but the Census Bureau have now published the new urban areas, the statistics, and also the map. If we can just scroll down. So on the left there is the 2010 urban areas map, and the right is the 2020 urban areas map. And I just drew some red circles around things that have changed. You can see there that the first kind of obvious change is that our urban area has grown right up to the border with Caroline County. I didn't expect that. Maybe some of you did, I didn't. But the point now is that should Caroline County decide to allow development on its side of the border at that point, Caroline County would then in the next cycle automatically be added to FAMPO. That I didn't expect. We have the same issue, but it's been known for much longer, where the Stafford County northern urban area exits Stafford County to the west. That is not Culpeper or Orange County, it's the next one up. It's a county that I would not have normally kind of associated with FAMPO, but should they do the same, should they allow a little bit of development just over the border, that urban area would slip over into their jurisdiction, meaning that they would theoretically be entitled to join FAMPO at that point in the next cycle. So those are two things to watch. So I was rather more expecting Orange County and King George County to be the ones that might be more likely to be added to FAMPO in the future. But there are some other options here which perhaps I hadn't thought of personally.
One question, you can't see it from this, but with the Dahlgren area of King George, did that come closer to basically being attached to Washington on the Maryland side?
Don't believe the Washington metro area goes all the way down to that portion of Maryland.
Well, they include the county. The question is like, how close does the urbanized area therefore, I guess it's Charles.
I don't believe the urbanized area gets down to the river.
I think La Plata is where it, last time I saw the map.
Still maybe 5 or 10 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't get there.
I don't think Dahlgren's an urban area anymore.
Spotsy, the urban area is growing west, right?
Yeah.
So it potentially in time will grow up to the Orange County border, with Lake of the Woods and all that kind of thing being the connection point. Also, if you look between the northern TMA in Stafford and the southern Stafford urban area, that gap is closing. but it's going to take at least one more cycle. And the big thing there is we don't know how the Census Bureau are going to change the criteria again in 2030, right? They changed the criteria. And so who knows if the criteria remain the same and more development occurs in Stafford, between that gap, it may close. We thought it may close this time, but then they changed all the criteria and the possibility vanished for that to close.
What's going on with that gap there in the middle of like northeastern?
Yeah, I'm getting there. So that came about purely because of the change of the criteria.
Okay.
You'll remember that the criteria changed around the concept of infill, where they said we are no longer going to include areas where the housing number and the population numbers are less than the threshold. So instead of making what they called more unified shapes or something like that, they were going to not include those areas of lower density that previously they'd included because it made some logical sense to make shapes that were more feasible, usable. They decided this time we're not doing that anymore. It's one of the criteria that they changed, and therefore a big hole opened up in the Spotsylvania portion of the Fredericksburg urban area. That's a big change. However, the opposite happened further down. If you look at that circle south east, you'll see there that gap closed, right? So their gap closed, and in the further up, a gap opened. It just changed the way this all gets done. So, we'll have to wait and see what happens around Massaponax. It may develop further. That gap may close again. All depends. Parks don't have houses or people in them. So a park then, they're now starting to exclude areas like that, which before were just considered part of the urban area. So I mean, there, and then southern Stafford towards Geico, you can see there's also some change, growth, but also sort of areas cut out that used to be included. So that's kind of my take. I don't know if anybody has other comments. I'll get to the numbers on the next slide.
I was just going to ask, is the Spotsylvania Station and Crossroads Yard facility now in the urbanized area, or because at one point 17 was like the dividing, so just thinking from an ability to,
I actually haven't checked, so I can't tell you.
Any other thoughts?
So I was going to ask about the connection to Caroline, like right kind of at that part of Spotsylvania, there isn't anything. It's the Belvedere Plantation, but I know New Post is just to the west. It might just be the way the census geography is drawn, but it's not like, Spotsylvania urbanized area has gone right up to Caroline. In reality, there's a bit of a gap, but there's that growth in New Post, and that might give enough to that census tract or block group, whatever that is, to give it the population density.
Yeah, it matches up with the blocks, so that whole area there's no roads that carve it out, so it's one big census block. So.
But the point remains, if Caroline just puts a small urban area other side the boundary, they automatically join FAMPO, and it's not a question of we need to decide to add them. They have a right to join, and that's not what I expected. I expected King George and Orange would be the next two, but it's not necessarily going to occur like that.
So blame Spotsylvania County.
Okay, can we move to the next slide? So just in terms of the numbers, the good thing is that if you look at the bottom, the population figures, we don't have the housing units for 2010 because they didn't use that as a criterion in 2010. They now do. So that's a change in policy. But we do have the population of the urban area. For those of you who haven't seen this before, please remember this is not the population of the 3 jurisdictions. This is the population of the blue, right, of the urban area only. It was 141,000 in 2010 and 167,000 now. Remember, the policy changed. So it's not apples to apples. They changed the policy. So if they did not change the policy, my guess is that the population in the blue would be bigger than 167, right? We were even worried it might shrink the population because you now suddenly cut out all those areas that don't quite meet the thresholds. So it could potentially have made the urban area in our region smaller, and in some places it did, right? We are lucky that it did not do that. We still grew in spite of the fact that they changed the criteria and made it harder to be for a neighborhood to be identified as an urban area. We grew in square miles from 71.8 to 89.6, and we grew in population from 141 to 167. So we did grow in spite of them messing with the criteria, which means that we're a fast-growing region. So even when they make it harder to count numbers, we still grow because we're a fast-growing region, and I think that's kind of positive, although it brings congestion.
The square miles, it seems like, grow from 71.8 to 89.6. You look at the population. Is that, this question probably to the planning people, is that a good ratio or?
Of population per square mile?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it significantly changed the number of people per square mile. It's a small change, I would guess.
I know it would depend
of the
on
density.
People with the land.
Yeah,
Single family versus townhouses and things like that. I'm just curious about, those numbers.
I mean, more density in urban areas is better for transportation. Your cost benefit analysis is better. More density in rural areas is not good transportation planning because it just pushes the cost up of everything. To run a bus out to, 100 people out in a farmland is just very expensive. So this leads to a final question. We are supposed to, as FAMPO, work with VDOT every 10 years to reevaluate the MPA, the Metropolitan Planning Area, not the Metropolitan Organization. So my guess is because there's been no major change, that process probably still needs to happen, but it's probably a box ticking exercise. And I'm kind of looking at the VDOT folks to tell me based on their vast experience, how this was done in the past, because it's been 10 years since it was done. So I wouldn't have a clue what that process looks like. But the bylaws and the original MOU and federal and state laws require that we have at least a discussion and that we confirm FAMPO's MPA going forward for the next 10 years. And then we do it again in 2030. So there needs to be some kind of a process, but because we're not required to add a jurisdiction to FAMPO based on the results, I don't think necessarily there would be a big change, but we still should probably go through the motions.
Any comments on that, Stephen?
My comment is that I didn't participate in this 10 years ago. I will look into
Find out, let us know. Thank you. Done.
All right. Sorry you missed that excitement 10 years ago, Stephen. You regret it.
I mean, FAMPO may add jurisdictions if it wants to, but it's not required to because the urban area did not force our hand.
All right, so turning it over to the next item, which is Ian again with the Freight Summit.
Yes, the author of the report, Chris, is going to be available and attend the policy committee when this serves before the policy committee to answer more detailed questions on it. We did present it to all those who attended the Freight Summit. So many of you have already seen this because you came to the Freight Summit and we sent you the draft report to review incorporated changes, but a great number of useful information from Jacob at Spotsylvania, and we've incorporated a lot of that into this revised version of the report. But we really think that bearing in mind that it was very difficult to get participants and very difficult to get truck drivers to fill in surveys, in spite of a Herculean effort. We put in the most effort ever to get people to attend something, I promise you. And we did not get a high number. But we still did get a bunch of freight companies attend. Coley, if you can just scroll down to the list of attendees in the summit. Further. The report actually lists who attended. There's a table. There you go. So you can see there who all attended. We did get CSX attended, Harris Cheetah, Hilldrop, IDX, etc. So the Port of Virginia, DRPT, etc. So we thought, in spite of the fact that it was so difficult, we did get a good turnout, and we did learn a bunch of things through the particular summit discussions that were held over lunch on that particular day. And John did a lot of research, John did a lot of research into the metrics of what's happening with freight in our region, and he can tell you a lot about that. We're not going to belabor the point, but there are a lot of things in this report, and if you haven't already read it, I encourage you to read the report. It wasn't a formal study or anything, but we did do a lot of effort as FAMPO staff in terms of looking at OIP data, VDOT data, to look at what is going on. And one thing John pointed out to us through looking at that data is that we have John, correct me, is the highest number of bottlenecked road miles in the state of Virginia occurs within the FAMPO region. Am I right? Is that the right? And the previous staff member is no longer with us, pointed out that we have this problem of the trucks, the large trucks, arrive in our region exactly as the afternoon peak hour traffic hits our region. So the big trucks hit our region. So the freight is clogging up the I-95 and Route 1 and 17 at exactly the same time as the afternoon peak hour when everybody's trying to get home. That's an important factor. And must say, we're going to send this over once the policy committee approves it. We're going to send it over to OIP. And because of our engagements with Jatenda at OIP over a long period of time, he is starting to, at every OIP meeting that he speaks, point out that he knows FAMPO are pushing him to do something about the freight issue in our region, and that the VTrans needs do not, in the current form, adequately capture freight delay times when they're identifying needs, VTrans needs. And as you know, VTrans needs leads to smart scale funding. So he is very well aware that we are pushing him to change metrics to, in VTrans needs calculations, to take account of freight delay times, because at the moment they're all based on volume. Tonnage. Sorry, I meant volume of goods, not volume of how many trucks. It's the tonnage that's being moved that gets the money at the moment, not the delay times. So you can have less tonnage, which we have, but we have much bigger delay times and bottlenecks in we have 30 miles of bottleneck roads in our region, and we can't get any money to do anything about that because the VTrans need does not look at those metrics. It only looks at tonnage. And so he's said now publicly at OIP that FAMPO has been talking to him about this issue and that we need to make some adjustments. And he's already proposed 2 metrics that need to be changed to try and help with that. So we've won a little battle there, I think. And I'm going to send him this report once the policy committee adopts it.
How is bottleneck roads defined? Is there a methodology for?
There's the expert over there. Sorry, I'm putting him on the spot.
Yes, I don't remember at this point in time, but it was basically lane miles hitting a certain level of congestion.
Okay.
So, we took that as you would have segments of road that would fit a certain level of congestion, and then how long those miles are within our region. And so if you look at our region, like we had the lane miles on Harvard River, Virginia, but because of our network is so much smaller than our network, that percentage wise, we have a much larger dependency on very few roads having severe bottleneck.
Okay.
At Northern Virginia, I mean, it's basically the number of miles is almost equal. Northern Virginia might nick us by like 1 or 2 miles or a handful of miles, but once you figure that that is their entire network, then it becomes a lot less. There are more than Hampton roads and Richmond combined.
So were the
Hampton Roads and Richmond combined, we have a bigger problem than they have.
Don't have bottleneck miles. We are the bottleneck
Yeah.
between Northern Virginia and Hampton roads.
Seriously, and I know some of you don't all agree and don't all agree with me, certainly, and that's fine. But that is one of the reasons I've started to make this point to the policy committee, that the grid network of roads in this region is limited. And because it is limited, these are the after effects, right? Because you know what a grid is, all of you planners, obviously. So we have teeth missing out of the grid, lots of teeth missing out of the grid, lots of lines missing out of the grid. And that leads to a lot of these outcomes. There's not alternatives in a lot of cases. Not knocking the I-95 upgrades, just in case anybody thinks I am. I think that the I-95 now is good to go for 10 years once these improvements are complete. The I-95 itself, massive upgrades, massive new bridges. I know that Spotsy still strongly feels that we need these extra 2 lanes. We have that as our FAMPO policy, that we need the 2 extra lanes further south. But apart from that, the I-95 itself is going to move really a ton better. However, getting off the I-95 and going somewhere, that's a whole nother problem.
Yeah, and just to specify, kind of getting back to the question of like severe congestion and back to tonnage, is that we like 95 in Northern Stafford has the most number of trucks out of any other roadway segment in Virginia. So
just say that again.
More so
just
than
say that again.
Trucks we have than any more commercial trucks than any other segment, roadway segment in the entire Commonwealth.
And which roadway segment is that?
95 in North Stafford. So more so than any other segment in Hampton Roads or Northern Virginia or elsewhere. We don't have them on tonnage, so we're dealing with large amount of trucks, just the number of trucks. So you know they're
carrying light
carrying more time sensitive and lighter. We're not carrying coal.
So the tonnage is less. The tonnage is less, but the number of trucks is more. OIP. Yeah. It's their official.
Compare data. Well, I was just going to say.
It's their official published data. It's not our opinion. We just.
Percentage of total volume, yes, but not the total number of trucks.
So in other words, they have more trucks. They have, relative to us, they have more trucks per 1,000 vehicles than us, right? So they have less cars and more trucks.
Total trucks.
But in number of total trucks, we have more.
There's only a few handful of segments throughout Virginia that handles more than 20,000 trucks.
This is a significant issue. Until John and Chris Lamb from Cambridge Systematic started digging into this data, we were not immediately aware of these metrics. There is a significant freight thing going on right here, particularly in Stafford, but in our region, that we are only sort of superficially aware of. And I really would encourage you to read this report. It's not a perfect report, right? But it's gives you significant data. And the one thing we can't get from OIP, because they won't release the information, is the data underlying their warehouse maps, where they show all the warehouses are. For some weird reason, they won't give us that data. And there's some weaknesses in their map. They've left out a bunch of warehouses which we know exist, and they won't give us their data so that we can verify which ones are missing They're like, no, that's private data. We won't give it to you.
BRPD has that data.
This is gonna sound stupid. How do we define truck?
Commercial truck over 26,000 pounds.
So look there.
Tandem,
So that could be like a flat truck, like a box truck.
tandem truck maybe?
Look at the
It's 13 ton.
look at the peak truck AADT.
Basically, you need a commercial license at that point. You're not gonna have a non-commercial driver at that point.
See that, the National Capital Region versus FAMPA?
That's our peak.
It's higher. All the freight metrics in our region are worse than you think they are. Seriously, when you read this stuff, it's worse than you think it is. We have a freight issue.
Any other questions regarding the report? As Ian suggested, I would highly recommend people reviewing it, reading it. And this will obviously go over to FAMPO, but if you have any questions, please let him know. If you have a phone a friend and know where he can get that data, please feel free to share.
Yeah. If you see a typo or an error in the report, please tell me before the policy committee, because I'd like to fix that before the policy committee. But we are taking this to the policy committee, asking for their approval, and then I'm going to send copies to OIP, VDOT, DRPG, everybody who I can think of will get a copy. CSX, by the way, is very interested in this summit, very interested in this report, and they want all the materials from us. So they're very interested in this issue.
All right, thank you. All right, John,
Hello.
CMAC STBG.
Now I can get some coffee while John.
Got a nice warm up. So I'm going to provide a CMAC STBG update. And just as a quick refresher, I'm going to let folks know that who weren't on the subcommittee meeting last week about the existing funding criteria. You can go to the next slide. So the CMAC STBG criteria have a very specific criteria of how it allocates funding, particularly for where existing projects are. So before we can apply new funding to new projects, we have to go in and basically backfill any other old project that might still have outstanding balances. And there are limits and criteria of how we can apply this. So as a whole, projects are capped to only a certain amount of funding in each of the CMAC and STBG pots. Even going back and backfilling, we can't just apply all the money into one project if it has a large balance remaining. It can only receive up to a certain amount per each funding year. So we have those two criteria on it. And finally, if it's a project that has a cost increase, we do have a specific threshold, the 10% threshold that has to happen in order to kind of receive the funding. If it's lower than 10%, it's just a notification to the TAC chair and FAMPO administrator. If it's over, it kind of triggers a full TAC and policy committee review. So next slide. So with the 10%, there's actually kind of a setup. So if it's, we can say, okay, do we have a reserve amount? We can recommend using that front. But if it changes by more, it kind of almost becomes like let's say a rescored project, but a reanalyzed project. So it could be something that where there's a recommendation to scale back the projects. Let's just say if it's a fully separated bike lane, maybe use sharrows, but that's a little in the weeds. We can say maybe this needs to be propped up with additional local funds. If there is a funding match to do it. We can kind of move money around. So maybe if it's a cost increase there, the jurisdiction has another project that's in future years, maybe they can kind of shift funds around. Or at the end, you really have the option to completely drop the project. So if it really scales over and above anything that can be handled, there's that option. So next slide. So when we talked to the subcommittee about this, kind of within the methodology, we had like 3 key things that we needed to address immediately. One was the 10% never specified what 10%. So it's just a 10%. Is it the total amount of funding? Is it the allocation? And with the recommendation from the TAC subcommittee, they said let's the 10% be based on 10% of the previously allocated STBG fundings, or $100,000, whichever is greater, because we do have several projects where they might only be $50,000 to $75,000, and so a 10% increase would be fairly limited in that regards. So it was kind of summed up that projects over $1 million, or sorry, $1 million and under can receive up to $100,000. That would be that 10% metric, and then anything over $1 million can get the 10%. The next item that was proposed from the subcommittee was that we needed to actually address kind of a quirk that happened in this year's methodology. We actually had a category that did not have an eligible project, and we did not have any mechanism for actually addressing how basically it says we need to spend 10, 15, or how many percent on a category. If we don't have it, how do we distribute that? And so for this tax subcommittee, they suggested that because it's an STBG active transport that's looking at Stafford TMA. So in this round for this one, it would be parked for a year until the next call for projects. And then for future years, if there's any situation, for whatever reason, where there are no eligible projects, then that money has been distributed into the other funding categories. And finally, we also discussed what would be the funding priorities. And because of this, we'll have 2 STBG calls in the same year. We discussed what should receive the priority. We have just under $2 million in additional kind of rollover or leftover funds, grants or other projects that have since been funded through other means. So through the tax subcommittee discussions, it was proposed that just under $2 million be applied to the existing projects first, and that we then prioritize funding in pending years 28, 29 for new projects. And from that recommendation, we generated a list of existing projects. We can go to the next slide, please, to kind of say, okay, what are our funding liabilities? So we have the FAMPO, GWRI Connect set asides that are required for each funding cycle. So we have those requests pulled out. We also had, and then we generated all of the existing projects that either through the jurisdiction requesting additional money or would be potentially eligible. So they could, in theory, be eligible for additional money. They just need to let us know if they're going to be requesting that funding or not. So for Stafford County, we did receive a list of projects. For example, the operational studies, $75,000. They need additional request of funds of $45,000. It's under the 100,000 request. So that's kind of that rule coming into play. And we have a couple of other projects. So we're still don't know if Spotsylvania needs funding, but they would be eligible to request for funding for the Market Street projects, the Transit Center lease space projects, or the Harrison Road BCR Trail could potentially receive a small amount of additional funding. Other projects that are a little bit more nebulous. So you have at least one project that is currently in our books as unfunded. That would be the 3 bus replacement vehicles requested in the previous round. And the way that the methodology says is that if you request a certain amount of funding, let's just say if it's a $5 million project, but you only request $500,000, if that's all you request from CMAQ STBG, it's kind of fully funded, so it can only receive a cost increase or additional funding through cost increases, or it has to be an application in the next round of CMAQ STBG. So we only had, I think, the transit buses underfunded in this round. So we're looking at approximately about $3 million in existing project liability. It could go up to about 3.6 million, depending on if Stafford, Spotsylvania County cost increases that needs to request before we start allocating funding and taking that to the board. So that's kind of where we stood. Again, we had approximately $2 million available in existing CMAQ funds. So I did identify whether or not we could use that funding immediately for CMAQ. So we do have an ongoing list, and then we can apply the new, for the most part, almost all the new monies potentially to new projects. There's about $1 million separation, but I think that's something that's up for further discussion at a later point in time.
Yeah, John.
Yes.
Just a question. This is a suggestion, but this sheet, it might be more helpful to have one sheet that basically is all the projects that are eligible for CMAQ, another one that's like all the projects that are eligible for STBG, And I recognize that some are eligible for both, but it might just be a little clearer. I'm a little confused
Yeah, well,
at this, given that there are some CMAQ ones and some STBG ones.
so the only one that cannot get CMAP funding would be the operational study. And basically anything that's eligible for CMAQ is eligible for STBG. So this is the only one that's really broken out as a no. That's kind of why I just put the availability there. So that's really, almost everything is kind of dual eligible at this point in time.
Does dual eligible mean that they're still allowed to get the alternative funding or the other funding pot, even though they may have only applied for one?
So the way the methodology says is that we need to allocate funding in the way that makes the best sense to ensure project delivery. So if we have to kind of move funding pots around to make it work within a given time, we have that capacity.
Okay.
The question, the thing that we won't change is the requested funding. If you initially requested 500,000, we won't tamper with that. But we have in the past shifted projects. I mean, you've even recommended as the TAC that we shift between HIP funding or CMAQ or STGB, and that kind of thing we're very happy to play with, provided we don't exceed the totals allowed in each case. But whether you make it CMAQ or STGB, provided it's eligible, we don't care. We are agnostic to which kind of money you put on which project, provided we stick to the rules of it can't get more than 10%, it can't get more than half of a year's allocation. All those other rules.
We can bend, you can kind of bend CMAQ money a little bit for STBG. We just have to show the air quality benefit at that point. So it'll just require documentation on our part. So it can go to road widening, adding an extra lane, but if it's something that would be CMAQ eligible, we could kind of bend that and use that.
Whatever gives us the most bang is what we will try to achieve.
Can they revise the number? For example, if there are 3 buses and they ask for $500,000 and the number is too low, can they make it 2 buses?
So we don't, well, in theory, you're not supposed to change the scope, but in this particular case, I guess the money is allocated for buses, right? And if the price of the buses radically changes, I mean, the question is, what happens if it goes the other way, right? What happens if, can they now buy 4 buses? It's something which I guess the methodology should clarify.
Can I ask Ian, what caused none of the active transportation projects to be eligible in this round? Were there specific things like to not be eligible for that 10%? What was it, 15%?
15%.
15%, yeah.
You mean the active transportation, or you mean transit?
Well, I guess,
Which did you ask? Sorry,
yeah.
So the explanation is quite easy. The STBG specifically, not CMAQ, the STGB specifically has set aside in the methodology active transportation money exclusively for active transportation projects that benefit the TMA in Northern Stafford.
It has to be within a 1 mile.
And it has to be within a 1 mile buffer of the TMA. So if you're outside of that buffer, your project won't qualify for STGB active transportation money. It could qualify under CMAQ,
CMAQ, yeah.
but not STGB money.
Okay, and so there just weren't any projects.
There weren't any projects that qualified this round.
Okay.
And so the subcommittee recommended that we allow that money to be parked for 1 more year to allow Stafford the opportunity to find a project that would qualify. And after that, we would just throw the money in the general pot to be allocated elsewhere.
Any other questions regarding?
Is this the last slide?
Just to let you know what the next steps are, is like we've been meeting with the local jurisdictions about any questions to their specific projects and their scoring methodology. We will be generating a validated scoring result and plan to release within the next month. And of course, we have a ongoing TAC subcommittee to meet monthly through June to review the methodology and any post changes to that.
Now, Coley, if you could just go back 2 slides, that one. So what we do need from the TAC is a recommendation that I can take to the policy committee for these 3 items. We could wait 1 more month. It doesn't have to be today. But I think there is some agreement on the first two of those bullets, right? The 10%, we needed to clarify 10% of what? And the subcommittee made that recommendation, which I think is a fine one. I would like to take that to the policy committee to have them ratify that, because as you know, we can't make changes to the methodology without the policy committee. But that, all it does is clarify for us what the 10% rule means, because of the current methodology, it doesn't say, it just says 10%, it doesn't clarify that. And we've now, the subcommittee has recommended that. The second one, as you heard, parking the funds for 1 year to give Stafford the opportunity to find a project that is actually eligible. Otherwise, that category makes no sense. And then in future years, we won't hold it any further. If you don't come up with eligible projects in active transportation or in transit, the money would be thrown into the general pot and given to other projects in other categories, right? So that's the proposal. And so those two were, I think, there was general consensus at the subcommittee. The third one, we needed more information. And the question was, how much funding are the existing projects going to be? And so the answer is that table John has produced, which shows that it's probably around $3 million. And we don't know how much money we're going to get in this year's allocation. Does Susan have any further advice?
Your project's under $1 million or over $1 million. Is that your allocation or is that your estimate?
That is the request, the initial request. So if you initially request a million, you can only get up to 100,000 extra. If you requested 2 million, you can get up to 10% of the 2 million, which is 200,000 in this particular case. However, just remember that the sentence in the methodology goes on to say, if more is required, we can't, as staff, make a proposal. We have to ask the policy committee to approve additional funds. So up to 10%, we can just recommend it and they will rubber stamp it or not, right? But if it's more than 10%, we have to ask the policy committee whether they want to fund that project for much more funds.
For example, you also want to email Morello, actually, the requested amount is over the 10%, so this will need an action at a later date to allocate those funds.
We can't give it the full money that it requires because it is over the 10%.
So if you don't recently did some estimates based on the memo that came from chief engineer based on inflation rates. Based on that memo that came out. Some add year inflation this time. There's several projects that are under impact to budgetary estimates for outside of those inflation. We can give you those. The administered project. Those may or may not be projects going to cost because we're still working realities on updating.
So just to clarify, this is what the TAC was clarifying. That's going to impact final project delivery. But for our 10%, it's only what the applicant was allocated. Not necessarily what they requested, but what they were allocated.
But at the time they're asking,
realize
this impact.
Sure.
Okay, so just
Sure, but in their case, the question is, does FAMPO fund the difference, or does the locality fund the difference, or does VDOT fund, or Smart Scale fund the difference? So
let me finish her comment with the money set in the house. They have requested that there be available funding. Go back through all these projects, and they're looking at possibly funding the shortfall that has been presented. Not been approved. So we are working through that. There is a possibility all the shortfall will be covered.
great.
I can't say this.
We'll be your best friend.
I can't say that. I can only tell you what they presented. The number on that estimate though for the shortfall based on that inflation. Yes. This big. Yeah, they found money, but they got this big.
So,
So,
this-
it was something on around, someone off a line of like 800 million,
You will,
and they only got like 200 million.
Susan, we'll love you forever if that happens. But
You want Ian's love or not?
if
That's the question.
if you look at this agenda, you will see that I did something which Susan specifically asked me not to do. Every agenda, I'm now adding 10A, right? Notification of changes to cost estimates on FAMPA projects. The reason I did that, for this very reason. Now, I accept the fact that some months there's just no news, nothing to say, right? But when there is, we're just reminding localities and VDOT that we need that info because
Just started helping out. The chief engineer came out and Michelle and her staff originally just had to go through anything that was going to add is FY24. But then she had to go back and redo all those estimates to include that inflation rate for all the projects. And so she's been working diligently. And until with the CTV meeting, we did not know exactly how they were going to plan to take on this.
so it's Michelle I should be loving forever and not Susan, isn't it?
On these projects, what is inflation, straight inflation on the project versus what has been a project change?
Yeah.
This caused the.
Scope change.
It's really scope change. This could be unanticipated things between. Estimate not as good as our scale now. It's around the region of that.
So-
That would be a non-funded.
So from this CMAC and STBG process, we do have a mechanism. So let's just assume that Bankside Trail, which is supposedly, hopefully becoming smart scale funded. If for whatever reason it comes back and say it needs another $200,000, the CMAC and STBG methodology says if something was previously approved for funding, and then it's smart scaled or funded through any other means, it can, and it's considered funding, and then there's a budgetary shortfall, there is a mechanism that all of a sudden it jumps to the top of the list from the CMAC STBG side as an existing project. So even if it's fully funded through another means that it isn't, we've awarded it money from CMAC or selected other obligated funding for it, that it can actually come back and request additional money for us. It will still be required to do the 10% and all the other rules, but it falls off the STBG like monetary line, but not in the project queuing lines. There's that mechanism.
And we set aside a small amount of.
I just want to give you all the info. Is that one, estimates have changed. Two, we're hoping that the change amount is going to be covered by scale of the project is going to be covered by that.
We wait with bated breath.
As soon as we get it, we're all sitting there waiting for it too.
So we'll continue along with this process unless anybody has any objections. We still need to answer the third bullet item for Ian. Yeah, I'll get you in 1 second, Tom. So we will continue along with the process. Now, if we get funded and all the money's from VDOT, we want our money back. But, that's literally my thought to a call.
Brian.
So the comment I was going to make on the third bullet, we had some concerns about it, and I know there's some new information that is coming out from VDOT on cost estimates. We're not comfortable with supporting that at this point in time.
The whole.
Yeah, third bullet or the third.
Yeah.
Item, yeah.
Okay, right.
The 2-year parking, was that arbitrary or why not 1 year, why not 10 years? What was the rationale determining the 2-year parking and then it goes back into the big pot?
1 year parking.
Well, if there was nothing in 1 year, there's nothing in the next year, then it goes.
Being parked only for 2 years, but only being held on to for 1 year.
So we're only doing this as a one-off, right? Forever after this 1 year parking, the position is that the methodology will be adjusted to say that in future, if you don't put a project in, the money gets allocated elsewhere. Only for this round, because this is the first time we're using this new methodology and nobody had a project. We didn't want to, so Stafford gets a chance to find a TMA project that is fundable. So we will hold the funds for 1 year. After that, it goes back in the pot, and we don't in future hold it for a year, only this one time.
It's applying to STBG active in this round, but let's just assume we've solved all of our roadway project needs. Nobody submits any CMAC or STBG for roadways. What we'll do is then say, okay, that's great. Let's move it over into transit active transportation or studies. But in studies 1 year, we can move that other way. So we're just specifying that if the jurisdictions decide that there's really no project in this category, we can move it to the other projects that they submit.
It's just to allow projects to move along.
Gotcha. So we will have, we don't know how much, but we were told to plan as if it's round about the same as what we have now. So if we have around about the same as what we have now, we have around about 10 and a bit million for the 2 years, plus 2 million in leftover remainder and other funds, takes you to about 12 and a bit million. Might get as high as 13 million if the amount goes up slightly because of the new Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So I'm going to say my gut feel is that we're going to have 13 million in total to allocate. It looks like we need 3 million-ish for existing funds, which would, in total fund numbers, leave 10 million for new projects. So that's the broad concept. I know that Swasovenia has concerns about using all of the leftover and remainder funds on existing projects. So I'm well aware of that problem. But aside from that problem, it looks like about 3 million for existing projects, which would then leave about 10 million for new projects. Does that particular balance give anybody heartburn? Or aside from Paul's issue, which I know about, we do acknowledge that. But aside from that, does the 3 and the 10 as big buckets give people heartburn?
Any questions or concerns on that? Bassam, did you have anything?
I just need clarification on this. 1 million and under, you receive 100,000.
Up to.
Up to. Okay. In what case can you receive 80,000?
So if you applied for $1 million or less, and there is now a cost increase, and you need more money,
Right here.
we can then give you up to 100,000 additional funds if the increase is, let's say the increase is 150, we can only give you 100 because we can give you up to 100.
So the 10% applies to it, right? The maximum is 100, so 10% is the maximum you can give.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying that if these two items can be combined to one number, 10%.
I think we're just trying to say is if you had asked for or received $500,000,
Mhm.
10% of that would be 50,000.
Yeah.
The policy is trying to say that no, actually, we want to max it 100,000.
Which looks like number 2.
So you could get more than 10% if you asked for a small amount.
So that's the issue is you start with 10%, and then if it is less than 100, that's what you get.
Yeah.
So I was gonna make the point, I think the Spotsylvania issue is basically, the concern is basically with the timing of the money. Basically, this project, which we're calling new, is really split off from the CNAC STBG project, which came about because of Smart Scale. I think it might be possible to do 3 and 10, so that some of these existing projects don't need funding that's previous, right? Funding out in FY.
Yeah.
It might be possible to work things out. The concern we had is we don't want all the funding that's pre-28 allocated to actually kind of existing projects, and then the new projects don't have any access to any of that funding at all.
So I hear that completely. In terms of the recommendation to the policy committee, we could recommend that existing projects get funded up to $3 million, and then the balance all goes on new projects, but without specifying which 3 million, right? So if we don't specify that it's new or old money, but we specify that it's new or old projects, then it gives us the flexibility to put new money on old projects and old money on new projects or vice versa. It doesn't, we don't lock ourselves into which money we're putting. We're just putting up to that amount of money.
Now, I was just gonna say, so just to clarify, that would allow projects prior to FY 28 to still be funded with that $3 million at some point and or move to that FY 28 year.
And I just want to reiterate, wasn't kind of during the subcommittee, was not in favor of setting a maximum amount that can be allocated towards existing projects. Noted that we don't actually have a methodology to fund existing projects, so we'd have to figure that out as well.
Say that again.
Was not in favor of setting a maximum that be given to existing projects.
So you are saying we shouldn't cap it at the 3 million, we should cap it at whatever they need.
Yeah, that was our discussion during the
So
subcommittee.
if VDOT comes back and says it's not 3 million, it's 4 million, we should allocate the 4 million.
That was the basis for the methodology that was approved last year. Yes.
So
I mean, you're still gonna have, the methodology still has some very specific caps of how much money you can apply towards a project. So there is a cap in place. It's dependent on the project.
So I mean, the point then is, listening to Paul and Matthew, are we saying then that the existing methodology should continue, that we fund existing projects first without specifying which color of the money? In other words, which date
Well,
the money is received?
the concern would be that then you dry up the pipeline. And I think, wasn't that comment made,
You want to dry up the pipeline. You don't want old projects sitting there that just never get built.
but I'm saying, is that going to hinder our ability to start putting money towards projects now, next year, the year after that?
So
Maybe I misunderstood what you
So the methodology was, this discussion would have never happened if I didn't say to the subcommittee, are you aware of how this methodology tells me and the staff of FAMPO to allocate funding? Because I was trying to anticipate people getting really grumpy later. I'd rather get the grumpy early, then we can deal with it and get it out of the way, and we don't have the grumpy at the last minute when I'm trying to get the policy committee to vote. So I'm trying to deal with the grumpy. So I'm anticipating grumpy early, and I'm saying, just remember how this is supposed to happen based on the thing you all hammered in the subcommittee. And that is, you fund existing projects first, and what's left over, you put on new projects. And that caused a little bit of panic because people were like, no, hang on a second. And so we put the numbers on the table so that you can see what the impact is, right? That's what those numbers are. They may not be exact because Susan might come to us with some fiddles, but the percentage
They are
caps
right now.
they are right.
Yeah.
They are correct right now. That's exactly what the numbers are right now. But there are caps in place so that if Susan comes back with big changes, the caps still apply. We can't exceed the caps, right? We cannot suddenly add 5 million to that. It can't happen.
Stafford Borough sidewalk. It's an existing project. As far as the CMAQ methodology says, this amount, we consider it fully funding. The project scope can change, but it doesn't get a blank check to come in.
You're not going to fund it over 697,000.
10%, 10% or 100,000 things. So it still needs a little bit more money. And so for us, that's not a big item. But Route 1 Enon, it's fully funded as well. It's a big pot of money, and it's actually slowly getting to the cap of what you can spend in each of its funding pots. So it's going to a lot more. But because it's requesting more money, it has to go back before the tax. So it's not like it can just constantly consume money. There's actually very specific caps. So even if it needed another $10 million, well, it's already kind of reached it. It's really only eligible for about 3 million-ish more plus, and even that 3 million has to up into 3 funding years because it hits the cap of funding per year.
And of course, the policy committee can throw all of this out and vote whatever the hell they want to, because this is a guide. Our job as the TAC, and I'm not even a member of the TAC, I think, according to the paperwork, but our job as the TAC is to recommend, first of all, the methodology, and then recommend funding allocations to the policy committee. And they can fiddle with them however they want and change them. The whole point of doing this is to try and keep it more objective and to try and make it harder for the policy committee to do things that are not thought through because they're under pressure and all that. So our job is to give them a healthy recommendation. That's all we're doing, right? But the healthy recommendation has got all these rules, and we just want to give them a good option. And these first 2 points were unclear in the methodology, so we asked as the staff for you all to give us guidance that we can take to the policy committee. The third one, the methodology is very clear. Well, I just think that all of you hadn't remembered, and so I brought it up again because I didn't want screaming, right? That's why it's even being discussed.
All right, Paul, then Matt, and then Mike, if you've got comments on
So
that.
I guess I had a question just about how this $3 million figure was calculated, because if you do 10% of basically the current allocations, I don't think it is 3 million.
Okay.
It's a lot less than that.
10% is for cost increases. So things that would apply for cost increases would be like the operational study. I think like, for example, Harrison Road, VCR Trail. The trick is that any project that requested a larger amount that was only partially funded in a prior round, and this would be in this case like 3 bus purchase replacement. I think the request was just 1.5 million, but in the previous round it was only awarded 150 some $1,000. And so by the current methodology, it says fund this to completion first. So all of a sudden it says on this first. And so in theory, it's like if the request was higher, then we backfill it. If you requested a very specific amount, let's just say that the 3 bus buses only requested $500,000. Then we're just backfilled $150,000 or $144,000 in this account, but they requested.
So again,
it goes back to the original application.
So I think there's some confusion, like in the application process. We assumed that basically if you had a project that was in there before, basically it was partially funded and you needed additional funding, you had to submit it again. So that's what we did. And that was the direction the PAMPO staff did after the last go around. It wasn't specified in the new kind of methodology really what it was. But the issue just with some of these existing projects that are partially funded, PAMPO doesn't really have the resources to fully fund projects. We talked about this in the subcommittee.
And they're not trying to fully fund the project. They're trying to.
And now I guess you like your commuter. Where was your commuter project? The commuter parking spaces. Like this was, you submitted another round of applications for this. In your previous round, you requested this amount. We gave you that amount. At that point in time, CMAQ, SCBG considers this to be fully funded. It might be partially funded from your true project delivery scope, but at that point in time, because there's a scoring method that looks at cost benefit, it says this is now fully funded from our perspective. So to move this amount, you could do the $100,000. You can do the cost increases. And naturally, if you needed more money to continue to fund it, you would have to reapply. So if you would have requested the full amount through this, it would change the score. Like if you try to fund everything through this, it would change the scoring methodology, it would change the outlook. But then again, any additional funds would be potentially funded through that. So if you still needed, let's just say $5 million, we would have to backfill from that. However, you still have the annual caps in place, so you can only get $1.3 million, and then you still have a lifetime cap. So even if you try to have something funded for, let's say, $15 million, the most we can really ever give you is 9. So it's like a hard stop at that point in time, at least within the methodology phrase.
One of the things that I think is another weakness in the methodology is that it doesn't distinguish between existing projects that we didn't completely fund in previous rounds to the requested amount, and a locality or a transit operator coming back and saying, well, we need additional funding above the additional requested amount, so here's a new application in a new round for that same project for another X amount of money. It's unclear to me in the methodology whether both of those are allowed and whether we should treat them differently. So let's say Stafford has a project where they need more money because cost estimate changed or whatever on an existing project, but they requested 600 and we only funded 500. But Spotsy has a project which we fully funded, but now they submitted again as one of their 5 slots because it actually needs a lot more money, and they've now requested 250,000 on top of the 500,000. Do we treat those two the same? The one is an existing project where we didn't fully fund it. The other one we did fully fund, but the county needs more money, so they come back with another application that they put in one of their 5 slots. It's messy because those are, it's still the same project, right? But you're using 2 different ways to apply for the money. And I think we should reconcile that when we meet as a subcommittee and deal with that question, because how do we apply the rules in that particular case?
In that case, the Stafford County project would get the first chunk of money because it was underfunded from their previous request. We would fill that, and then any new project of the existing would be funded through a new project methodology. So it would be the Stafford County project first. And
Well, if it's a new project, unless, if it's a new project, because I think Ian's point is a phased project versus the same project in a different funding year.
phase project is
All of those are ways. So the problem with this is that you can manipulate the system, right? If you're clever and you think far ahead enough.
Yeah.
And so we want to avoid that as the staff because we want to be sure that we're giving everybody fair play on an existing project. But the methodology is sort of silent on what we should do under those circumstances. It leaves it sort of vague. And so, like, I mean, I don't want to cheat anybody out of money. It's whatever. Can you just scroll back for me, please? So those first 2 bullets, does anybody have a problem with us implementing those first 2 bullets? Because I can't do it without the policy committee's approval. So that's why I'm asking.
Anybody around the table? All right, I think we're good with this. Ian?
The 3rd bullet, there is a question about the timing. And so I'm not putting timing into the thing that I would ask the policy committee for, because I think we can massage that. And we've done it in the past. We have shifted later money to earlier based on the need of the project. And we asked the locality and VDOT and the applicants to tell us when the project's going to need the funding before we make any funding allocations. So we don't change the amount that you need, but we can change the year in which you need it by shifting funds around. And we have succeeded in doing it for 2 rounds since I've been here. I'm hoping we will be able to just do the same thing now, shift money around until it works, right? But in terms of current methodology saying that we fund the existing projects first and then fund all the new projects after that, that's the thing that I need guidance on. And I also, if we're going to change it, if we're going to leave it like it is, I don't need any guidance, right? Because it already says fund the existing projects, then fund the new ones, but with all the caps in place. So only up to that cap, only up to this cap, only up to that cap, all the caps are in place. But if we want to change that, then I have to take a proposal to the policy committee, because then you're not happy with the methodology we agreed a year ago. So that's the thing. Don't worry about the dates. We'll try massage all that for
I
everybody.
think we need to talk more about the 3rd bullet
Okay.
at the subcommittee. I think we're not ready to go to the.
Okay, so then I'm not going to ask the board for approval for any of this.
And if you go to your last slide, amounts on it.
One back.
We were talking about taking a look at this in terms of relating it to what existed in the pool of existing funds, and then in relation to what the new funds are too. I think adding that bit of data for the discussion would be very helpful.
So John can make you a new table for the subcommittee. I am officially informing you that I will need your answer at the next TAC, because we will run out of time if you don't. And if you don't come up with a solution that you all agree on, the default is going to apply, right? Because I can't stop this train. VDOT has to have the allocation by a certain date so it can go to the CTB for approval. So the train stops at the next TAC meeting. So for a month, discuss, argue, disagree, agree, do whatever you want to do. But whichever way you end up, if you don't come up with an agreed new proposal, then the existing proposal on that 3rd bullet will remain, and I have to allocate according to what's in the policy, because that's the official approved policy, and I have to hand the policy committee a recommendation that they can vote on by their next cycle. So the next TAC meeting is your deadline for telling me the answer to that third bullet. And actually, I raised it. It's not even a question which you raised. I raised it because I want you to be comfortable before I go to start allocating money.
Is the subcommittee meeting again before the next TAC?
Yes, John will set dates for the 5 months in a row. And the next meeting you need to, if you want to change anything at the next meeting is when you thrash it out and then the TAC makes a recommendation and then we take it to the policy if we need to, which I'm not sure we do. It doesn't look as terrible as I might have thought with these numbers, unless somewhere we've missed a number.
Any other questions on this? I think we can move along since we haven't had consensus.
This is related because there's something that's on the table that will be incorrect. Matthew requested that the Route 610 operational study be changed to multimodal study. We need FAMPO's approval, and it's also, unfortunately, it's very specifically stated in the UPWP that is an operational study. So we're going to have that changed. And I sent you something late last week about this. So I don't put you on the spot, but we will need to have that resolved.
I probably missed that email.
Okay.
So we will then need at the next TAC to have a recommendation from this body to the policy committee to make that change, if that is okay. So I think what I should probably do is send it to TAC members so that they know what it's about, so that next TAC you take a resolution.
Give us time we need.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
fine. So this came up because the naming sort of hit me up and I was like, no, that's something not right. And I had already gotten federal authorization. So then we started having more conversation and I was like, yeah, you're changing the scope. And so that's when I'm like, it's just not me saying okay. I need everybody else is okay on that.
Yes.
Then I need to go back and make sure I update the HWA to make sure that they get me authorization.
That's true. And if you change the scope of a project, it's not the same project. So then we have to be careful of the funding rules. So I'm going to send that request from you to the TAC members. And then please, by the next TAC meeting, think through what we're about to do so that we can have a resolution at the next TAC.
Thank you.
What is I'll talk offline, but you need to give me your deadline for by when I need to get you the recommended funding allocations for this year.
But usually around April. May. Get it up April and the beginning of May.
So if the policy committee takes a decision in May, you will be happy with that?
Yes, I can update through usually about beginning of June, I can update.
That's fine. So May policy committee meeting, we'll need to approve the funding.
But as soon as I get dates, I'll send it out to them.
And just Matt, just for you, just give us some thought whether in this process that once your scope changes, are we still allowed to give Stafford funding based on what their original project was versus what does the policy say to that? So just give that some thought for our committee discussion because I don't want to continue to go down this black hole of death.
I had one other comment just on the GWC 5307 funding. I say that like the Fred project number 24, the 3 replacement buses, that would be kind of a good candidate for that. Or are there any plans to kind of bring that funding forward to GWC to look for potential projects in the near future?
Yeah, so just to give an update on that, RTP and the projects that have been funded in the past allocated the money in a grant application. So we're still in the process of doing that. And then the next thing we're looking at is getting additional projects that have already been awarded. We had talked about their timing on the pump station projects. Fred talked about the timing of their projects. So we're kind of focused on that.
So that's for existing projects.
That's for existing projects. So I'm also waiting on a split letter from PRTC to tell us exactly how much money we have available to allocate. So that's the piece where we're looking forward that we're kind of waiting on before we move on making any additional. So we're trying to get old money flowing. We're trying to.
We're
nail
spending our
down-
money, by the way, old money.
Yes.
Great.
To, nail down exactly how much is available, and then I think the next step, go back to the GRC board and make official out.
It,
Turn to the 5307 funding, like what's the next year that's potentially available to be funded?
So I think we actually have to look at my notes. It's based on the federal fiscal year in which the money was needed from that TA.
It's FY 20. Because we did 18 and 19. We haven't done anything beyond 20.
I don't think that's
Because GWRC is only approved. That's one resolution.
need several.
We've done several allocations. We're talking about the money that you're referring to. But yeah, if you got those notes, that would be great.
I think it's federal fiscal year 21 and 22 that we have not allocated yet.
And just in theory, like if it could work out, Jimmy, would that work out for the timing? That's the number 24, the 3 placement buses?
You're not gonna get it fast enough. Based on what Kate just said. No, because it's still, GWRC still has to present it to this group. So once you have a date for that, and then it's gotta be approved by the board, not this group, but approved by the board. They've got to decide on how they're gonna allocate projects based on what the local jurisdictions need. So by the time we decide all of this, it will be done. Our stuff will be done. Now, can we go back and say we don't need our money anymore? Absolutely. But it doesn't sound like it'll be in the next 2 months and this will be done.
I must say, I have found it somewhat frustrating that the process of getting 5307 money to turn into an actual check from the time you start the process is way too long and very difficult. It is not an easy process. It has become, I'm not going to raise it here, but I have to tell you, it is a painful, very long, drawn out process. The money's there, but gosh, accessing it. I almost wanted to pull out my checkbook and write a check for the 40K that we allocated FAMPO, because it was like the cost of my salary hours to sit on those calls and meetings and everything to get the money is probably equal to the money we're getting. It's just a waste of man hours, honestly. It shouldn't be this difficult. It's a waste of people's time. It shouldn't be this difficult.
Is there any hope that that will get better in the future?
Yeah, so we're working with a new staff member here. So things have been moving much better since that. So I'm hopeful that we're kind of, slowly making progress, but that once we kind of get past a couple of initial conversations. We confirm it's federal fiscal year 21 and 22 dollars.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. The actual allocation at the GRC board is not the thing that takes the time. It can be done fairly quickly. The time is what happens from then until you actually get the money. Man, that's a.
Well, the board hasn't decided, to my knowledge, on how they're going to do the allocation of future funding and how they're going to do that split. So
They need a process split, like who decides how, well, no, not who, on what basis do you allocate the money? They don't have a methodology.
Just like on the split letter, I thought there was like a previous agreement with the Van Alliance on what kind of PRTC and NVTC and GWC would get. Like, is that being revised?
No, it's based on the revenue miles driven within each sub-region. But, and we're working on it. I just had a call with them on, the money is allocated from FTA, like our entire
he does a split between them and PRTC and these other.
Recipients.
And then the Vanpool Alliance portion of PRTC has to be pulled out and then further split down. So there's some questions at like each stage of that process of what the conditions are. But for the Vanpool Alliance portion to be split, it's based on, you know, the revenue miles, but that changes every year, so that has to be calculated. Anyway, they're working on it internally.
Who's working on it internally? PRT. So a lot of these steps are actually steps that get taken at PRTC. And PRTC's lady was, well, she's no longer working there. So there's a new person and it's taken some time to get up to speed on all the processes.
So the short answer is, until we get this resolved, we keep it all of our. I won't say we don't.
I'm not saying like, I wasn't saying take any money away. I was just saying like.
Swap.
If I were everybody around the table, I would say, take her money.
No, Paul's logic is correct.
It is.
But the problem is that the process of getting to implement that, oh God, I wish somebody else would do it, because when you say those words, 5307, I just don't want to be involved anymore. It's such a pain.
It looks like Joe Stansfield might be unmuted.
Yeah, no, I'm here. I just wasn't sure if what I could add that was actually valuable as opposed to just piling on, and I couldn't really hear what Kate was saying so well there. But yeah, essentially we did have a lot of turnover internally. Betsy Massey, who was our grants programs director and kind of was the architect of this and the split letter both regionally, and then the subrecipient agreement left the organization. And to say that was an opaque process is being extremely kind. So we have had issues filling that position. We do have a lady, Cynthia Porter Johnson, who is acting in that role, and we do have a new chief financial officer, Phil Perella, who is kind of seeking to bring some clarity to that, but it is very much a work in progress. I apologize to the TAC here that has taken as long as it has. There has been problems on both sides of the equation, but most notably now they are definitely on the PRTC side. And we are working to resolve those, but I know that it has been, Ian's right that it should bring him out in a rash, because it does everybody. So I do apologize for that though. And there is a hope that it will improve. It must improve, in fact.
Any other comments or questions on that? So just relay that to the people that need to know, and we'll go from there. All right, Smart Scale, CCB, score review, Ian.
So Carrie presented this to the policy committee and to the GWRC board because we got the results of our smart scale load just before those board meetings, and we didn't want to delay and first tell the TAC, because by then it would be in the newspaper and there would be no point. So we told them. So we've got the presentation for you today. I'm not sure that I need to go through the entire thing in detail, because I think all of you basically know this was a fantastic year for us. So the numbers are all in your pack, and you've all had this pack for, since Wednesday. So just scroll down. I'm not going to go through these broad numbers because kind of all of those. It's been out. The interesting, if we could stop on this one, there is built in, I don't know if it's 12.5% or something, escalation money that's been set aside. And there's also, when I listened into the CTB meeting, the 90 million over there is unallocated. So they could still allocate that money to projects. And there's also an escalation built in for projects that, for inflation purposes need another 12.5%. Whether 12.5% inflation is the right number is a whole nother question. Next slide. There are our projects. The red ones came through FAMPA and GWRC. The yellow ones were applied for by the jurisdictions themselves. And honestly, I think this was a great year. It's just under $150 million in projects in total between the jurisdictions and FAMPO and GWRC. And it's 5 projects that we got funded at FAMPO and GWRC out of the 8 we submitted. So 5 out of 8 recommended for funding is a pretty good number. We could always, we would love to always add another one, like maybe the Lafayette safety improvements would be a great one to add. It's the next FAMPO GWRC project. It's the next highest scoring FAMPO GWRC project on the list, but it's not the next highest scoring in the district because some Northern Neck projects and other projects are the next highest scoring projects in the district. Well, I would certainly love to add Lafayette Boulevard to this haul, but it is certainly a great. Next slide. So Paul just made a comment to Carrie that there was a change made to one of these rounds after the fact, after the score. So technically, I don't know if Paul wants to elaborate, but technically one of these rounds, the outcome was slightly better than what we have on the slide in the end, because this is the first recommended set of scores and money, but then changes were made. I think, was it round 3, Paul?
Yeah, I'll just briefly talk about it. It's not a big deal. Basically, in round 3, the line between kind of local and regional projects got blurred. And what happened was high priority funding came available. Well, I guess I'll just back up. There's huge outcry statewide. Hampton Roads for that big tunnel project. Most of the money in smart scale. So the state came up with another 200 million in high priority and kind of was doling that out. And FAMPO came up with a regional solution that the city got a bigger version of the Route 3 project. I'm not sure if that was the initial or the final version, but it included northbound off-ramp from 95. Then Stafford got the Route 1 Enon Road project, and then Spotsylvania got the Harrison Road, Salem Church Road project. So my comment was just that the final versions of those 3 should be on there. It was
there was additional,
and there was a regional project for a Route 3 East commuter lot project that was given up.
So Paul's quite correct. So that was the initial allocation. There were additional allocations made, and so really there were 3 additional projects. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that we've had a great year, that we got 5 out of our 8 projects this time, which is the highest number we've got. So I just feel like the people in this room are the ones that did the work for both the FAMPO GWRC meetings, projects, and for the local projects, right? Of course, there are others. There are engineers at VDOT that worked on them. There's Carrie, who did the heavy lift of this round, who's not here today. She's online. Yeah, she's online. I beg your pardon. I can't see who's online. But I just wanted to thank everybody, because all of your comments, some of them nasty comments, actually improved the project. No, they actually improved the projects, right? So some of you said, Paul kept bugging me about the total project cost. He was like, we need to not exceed about so many million because we won't get the funding. Other people were saying, Michelle was saying that Bankside Trail project, you don't have this, and this, and this. And I had to go to the city and argue, and where are the easements? Have you got the land? And Michelle was saying, do a public meeting and all this sort of stuff, right? And we got grumpy with each other a little bit, and we worked, whatever. But there's a result, right? So all of that stuff was valuable, even though we irritated each other somewhat. It was valuable because it improved the projects, and we got a big haul. And I think that that's not bad. So thank you to everybody, even for your sometimes strong comments. There's the result. It's 5 out of 8 projects, $48.2 million plus $100 million of projects at the local level. And we learned a few things that we'd like to improve on next time, but that's a pretty good outcome. I'm very happy with that. And just hint, if there's extra money, we'd love for Lafayette Boulevard safety improvements. If anybody can twist anybody's arm to deal with that, that would be wonderful.
Give up a few other things.
No, we're not giving up. we don't give up. And one of the things our CTB member pointed out to me is that the VCR Trail project, and I'm not going to get the language right, okay, so please forgive me in advance, but it was funded out of the statewide pot of small scale money and not out of the district pot. But I'm not sure if that's the right terminology, but that's probably one of the reasons why we did really well, is that that 16 million, was it, for the VCR Trail did not come out of what was going to be
District grant.
allocated to the district.
The district grant program was funded out of the high priority projects.
It was funded out of the high priority projects fund. So that was good for us.
So kudos to FAMPO staff and obviously everyone around the table. It's a great job. Obviously, we know Ian was the only one who was grumpy because we were all happy to have these engagements.
Nobody was really nasty. We just told each other, no, that's not going to work, and it improved the project.
We may have been, but it's okay. But we will pretend it was all done with a smile. So, but this is the reward for it. So obviously, as VDOT pushes us to make our projects better, and we're like, why do we have to do all this work? It's almost like, you know, the teacher giving the child homework. That's why you got to do your homework so you can get a good grade. So thank you, VDOT.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle's projects were valuable ones. They made me grumpy, but they were valuable questions because we resolved them, which pushed the score up, right? So bring on the comments. I'll try and not get grumpy with you all.
So kudos to everyone. So thank you. Stephen, did you have a comment?
No, I'm just enjoying all of it.
All right, Paul.
And I'll just say it was a very successful round. I'll say just looking ahead with Lafayette Boulevard, I think to get that, I think we need to probably have two applications. I think trying to shove it all into one didn't work for what we wanted to do. So just keep that in mind maybe for future rounds.
Absolutely.
Good.
All right. Anything else on Smart Scale? Okay, I'll turn it over to Becky.
Yep.
I want to compliment Matthew Lehane and the staff at FAMPO prior to my coming. When I came, you can go to the next slide, when I came to interview for this job and looked at the website, PMP and CMP page is award winning. The other, when I did crash training, VDOT's Tableau crash site, also off the charts. I've never seen anything like it. Next slide, please. One of the first, back in that, you don't have to go back, but the most important thing on that site is that it assists in the transportation project selection process to ensure limited funding is targeted to the right places. And the site is easy to maneuver. What our efforts are per quarter is it's arranged by fiscal year. Click on FY22, for example, you'll see, or FY23, you then go to these choices, and then Matthew and the team set up these sites in ArcGIS Experience Builder. And next slide, please. When you go to these sites, each widget, the corridor and all these choices for weekday congestion, weekday speed, weekday travel time index, and those same metrics for weekend congestion. The data is compiled from a site called RITIS, R-I-T-I-S, which is a situational awareness, data archiving, and analytics platform used by transportation officials, first responders, planners, researchers, and more. RITIS fuses data from many agencies, many systems, and even the private sector, enabling effective decision-making for incident response and planning. The data is downloaded from INRIX, I-N-R-I-X, which collects anonymized data on congestion, traffic incidents, parking, and weather-related road conditions from billions of data points daily in more than 145 countries. The data is aggregated from connected cars and mobile devices, cameras and sensors on roadways, and major events expected to affect traffic. Next slide, please. I have some trend information on these slides. This is taking, putting all of the high congested corridors that we study through the congestion management program all in one shot. And this shows the trend information, 2019, 5 o'clock travel time index, 2020, we were into COVID. Next slide, please. 2021 and 2022, not quite as ugly as 2019. We all know the trends, both intermittent and permanent, that happened since 2019. A lot of projects have been completed on I-95 to relieve congestion, and then permanent changes have been made in our workplace. I thought in looking at Rodney earlier that prior to 2018, let's say the employee's performance, annual performance evaluation would include how promptly they were at work on time. I think everybody is realizing that allowing flexible work hours to allow employees to safely get to and from and not be so, we've changed a lot since 2019 in a lot of ways. Next slide, please. The best thing about this site, the landing page, has a really fantastic interactive web app. Connor and I are now updating this so that you can come over here in the layers, see all the congested corridors. We're updating it to 2022 or 2021. Crash data is about as frequent as we can get. And in the next slide, and last slide, what you can see when we finish this will be all at one shot, the weekday, morning, and PM travel time index, the weekend travel time index, volume to capacity ratio, which we're finding from VDOT's performance for planning site. That's great. And then crash rate. I'm doing a little of my crash analysis experience to take the traffic volumes from P for P, what we call the performance for planning, and then taking the subcorridors and using the Tableau Power BI crash tools to really get a great multiple year of crash volume that we can look at real accurate crash rate data now that that's available. So that's the melding of the crash tool and the INRIX and data that we get here, as well as a volume to capacity ratio. P for P has that calculated. Also in the performance for planning, it gives you the freeway capacity, which is great because I can then get the traffic volume, but I know from P for P how to get that capacity to do a true volume capacity ratio over time. The volume is updated. That capacity is such an important number. And that's my last slide. Matthew, I don't know if did you create this? Do you want to kind of
Step out.
it's very impressive. I've never seen anything like it.
I did the dashboard tool that you saw earlier on. I created that, but the map that you're showing here was done by Lana.
Great.
So just remember, the reason we do this and the reason we tell you about this is because there's a federal requirement, and because we have the TMA double requirement that we do this. And you'll see that one of the reasons that FAMPO gets funding out of STGB is because of federal requirements, and this is one of them. So we have to get staff to do this, to download this. So first of all, it's a federal requirement. Second of all, what it's supposed to do, my understanding anyway, is that we're supposed to monitor these corridors so that when we see the congestion and the traffic getting worse and worse and worse, we look at this when we're planning our LRTP and when we're planning projects that we're going to fund. We look at congestion and the resultant air quality issues and take that into account when we're choosing which projects to build and which projects to fund, right? So it's both federal mandate that we do this, and second of all, we're supposed to then use it in our planning. So the federal mandate requires us to inform the policy committee every time we update this thing, which I'm not sure that the politicians all completely understand, but we're going to tell them at the policy committee, by the way, we've updated it again. We're fulfilling our federal mandate. We're informing you that it's there on the website. You can go and look at it at any time, and we're doing it because we're required to. Done.
Thank you. All right, next item, John, I'll turn it over to you.
Actually, I'll make this one very quickly. We are still in the process of inquiring on our transit projects to be able to put them into our planned obligations to fill out the air quality conformity analysis portion. So we basically rushed through the roadways to got those in. But we're now adding the public transit items in. And so once we're done with that, that'll be an item to include in the, probably the next, agenda packets moving forward.
So John's not telling you that he turned around that list and all the data that we got from VDOT head office in 24 hours to try and get it into the policy committee packet. But unfortunately, because we didn't have the transit data, we have to delay. So what we
VDOT roadway projects need to go to VDOT for their conformity analysis. I do not make the break that also need the transit.
So we have been in discussion with Dan Grinnell and colleagues, and they would like to do the air quality conformity analysis on the same day as the next TAC meeting. So, Madam Chair, what that will mean is that the first 20 minutes of next month's TAC meeting, they would request us to have the ICG, is it? Committee meet here at the same time in the same venue with all the same people and do what we did last time for the LRTP, but this time for the STIP and the TIP. They will go through the conformity process and launch it here, and they would ask the TAC at that meeting to approve the public participation process, which the resolution at the policy committee gives the TAC the authority to do. So the same as last time, we'll follow all the same process and procedures as last time, but they would like to come to the it's not actually the TAC meeting, we're tacking a meeting onto the TAC, if I can put it like that, so that the first 20 minutes is a totally separate meeting run by central office, and then we just continue immediately afterwards with the regular TAC meeting.
Sure.
So would the ICG meeting be at 9:30 or would it be like before 9:30?
But I mean, I'm open to your suggestions, bearing in mind that the two gentlemen have to drive here from Richmond. But we can do it at 9 or whatever I mean.
I'd recommend no earlier than 9 or 9:30.
Some people have to travel from other places, right?
That's a great idea.
Anybody have any issue with 9 o'clock, or do you want to start it at 9:30?
We can.
I think 9 o'clock would probably be my recommendation, but I'll defer to the group.
So 9 o'clock for the ICG.
We're flexible. I just wanted to know what the time was.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any issue with 9 o'clock?
No, 9's fine.
Okay, so I will tell Dan Grinnell and his colleagues that 9 a.m. we will do the ICG, followed immediately after by the TAC.
Sure.
It's going to be a long day next Monday because we're going to have this.
Day to day.
Fred, breakfast this time?
What?
Fred, breakfast this time?
Well, we certainly will give lunch for those who have to sit through the whole process. Becky's good at getting us lunches.
It looks like Jim Ponticello is unmuted.
Ah, Jim?
Yes,
Any
I
comments?
am here and I am listening, and we will be there at your next TAC meeting at 9 a.m. to kick off the ICG meeting. And I appreciate all your effort with
Fantastic.
this.
Fantastic. We welcome you. We'll start with you at 9 a.m. and followed by the TAC meeting.
Great.
All right. So thank you. Next item is correspondence. That is just basically an email/letter that says we got some money for safe streets.
Yes, and we're very excited about this. You'll remember actually initially Paul suggested that FAMPO does this particular one. And Becky put this together. We've been awarded the money plus the local match. So it's 120 odd thousand, including the local match. And VDOT gave us that project for $30,000 to do the highway safety plan, which is maybe a third of the safety action plan for this grant. So we've got to appoint a consultant to develop the rest of it, and we got quotations already before we submitted the application. I think the money is only available on the 1st of July, but I'll check the date. So thanks to Becky for putting it together. Thanks to all of you for your help and convincing your localities to support the local match. We've sent a note to them to prepare to include the local match in their annual budget, but it's small amounts of money, right? It's like the biggest amount, I think it's like $8,000, and it's a one-off. The word on the street is that they got less applications in this cycle than they were expecting, which means that there's extra money left over, which they've rolled over into the project pot. So the project pot has grown. There's even more money available for projects, but we have to have the plan before we qualify to get money for projects. So what will happen when it starts is that we will have a committee that needs to be formed of safety people, safety experts from each locality, which will have to meet at least once a year going forward to see that the projects in the plan actually get implemented. But remember, we apply for the funding to implement the projects from the same grant, right? I mean, you can use your own funds as well, but we can apply to the same grant for the funding to do the implementation. And the consultant needs to prepare the final plan, including the list of projects. So start putting your thinking caps on and thinking about your locality and what safety projects will be needed, but you have to justify them based on crash data and all that stuff, which VDOT head office is preparing for us in that highway safety plan. They're putting the safety data together for us, and they're doing it, Nick, for the 5 jurisdictions. So all 5 jurisdictions, safety data, crash data, and all the rest of it are being put together, and the plan will be for the 5 jurisdictions. So technically, we submitted it as a GWRC application, not as a FAMPA application, so that we could include the 2 rural jurisdictions. So your safety issues are also addressed. Think in terms of rural roads, the soft shoulder problems that you have, and safety mitigation measures. Becky's got a whole list that she can tell you all about of what projects are eligible. But start to think about that. We will start probably on the 1st of July with a consultant putting together the final plan, including your projects. And then the following cycle, you apply for the project funding to build the projects.
Any questions? All right, we'll go to staff reports. Any reports from staff?
On FAMPA, we have no new reports that we need to tell you about. We dealt with it all in the meeting.
Okay, member reports. So cost estimates, Vita has already talked about the process of notifying localities about the additional projects, so I don't think there's anything additional there.
And notify us, please, also.
Also, for the new transportation projects, does anybody have anything? All right, final item, unless anybody has any member reports, I'll just say, because we had the conversation during our subcommittee meeting, but I'd like to welcome Melody Fowler. She is our new Deputy Director of Transit. So be nice to her. She will actually respond to all of your emails that I have ignored. So please feel free to just make her welcome. So welcome aboard, Melody. We are happy to have you.
When you're on leave, is she the person we should call?
For transit projects, yes. For city projects, still refer to Mike. You've got all your stuff. Mike's the man. All right. And so just as a quick item, I just want to prepare you because Nick and I were chuckling a little bit over here. So when we have our next meeting, obviously we'll be talking about CMAQ and SCBG. We'll hash pretty much everything out during the meeting that we have for a subcommittee to reduce the time at this particular meeting. So the city will make sure that we do the same, but just talk to your other representative who may not be in the committee so that we can push this along. Because I think we're just going to end up having a vote. Hopefully we'll all agree in the subcommittee meeting, but if we don't, it could be, just a vote. So I'll totally be ready for taking names and who said what at the next meeting as far as a vote if we can't get to our happy place. And just note for the CMAQ SCBG, our options are do something different or we're moving along with the current policy. There is no in between. So I just wanted to share that because I do want to make sure that I value you guys' time. The discussion is good and it's healthy. And so I'm glad we had it because I think we were still all on the same page as localities about item number 3. But just know if I'm moving it along, it's not because I don't want to have a discussion. I just want to make sure we use the committee time for that purpose. So hate me later. All right, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good week, everybody.
I got the question for you.
Yeah.